Does it ever feel like you're a marketing professional just speaking into the void? But with LinkedIn ads, you can know you're reaching the right decision makers, a network of 130 million of them, in fact. You can even target buyers by job title, industry, company, seniority, skills, and did I say job title? See how you can avoid the void and reach the right buyers with LinkedIn ads. Spend $250 on your first campaign and get a free $250 credit for the next one. Get started at linkedin.com/campaign. Terms and conditions apply.
This episode is brought to you by Nespresso. Gift magical mornings with Nespresso Virtuo Pop. Compact and stylish, Virtuo Pop is made to meet every morning coffee craving. From espresso to coffee, hot or iced, at the click of a button. And celebrate the season with Nespresso's limited edition coffee flavors. Sweet almond and hibiscus, cinnamon and candied tamarind, and festive double espresso. Magic in the making. Shop the holiday gift collection exclusively at Nespresso.com.
The all-new 2026 Hyundai Palisade Hybrid doesn't just turn heads. It commands respect. With its stunning exterior, luxurious interior with available captain seats, and spacious third-row seating and equipped with advanced technology, you and the family are making a statement before you even step out. Okay, Hyundai. Visit HyundaiUSA.com to learn more and experience the all-new 2026 Palisade Hybrid today.
Wonder-working power in the precious...
Incredible as they seem, are not the results of mass hysteria.
You may wish to adjust the dial you are currently tuned into.
The wrong station. Three. Kalahaniah, the ritual obscenity. Fire flickered against the painted walls of the men's quarters. The low chatter of conversation, the pluck of the lyre and soft piping of the owl's flute, the murmur of a small drum. Over by the open window, a courtesan laughed and shivered for a moment in the autumn wind. Somewhere, a kylix broke. Men made lewd comments as a woman bent over to tidy up the shards. Bottis flicked the dregs of his drinking cup at a target on the wall. There was a mural there, a portrait of the 9 lyric poets, and Sappho had been chosen as the bullseye. Dark dregs ran down her face. But Bottis's fling went wide and hit the poet's Tesichorus in the eye. A heavy gold ring on his middle finger had fouled the throw. Agathon laughed, and Bottis twisted up his mouth, blaming the painted poetess. He held out the empty cup. A woman refilled it. So, Agathon leaned forward on the couch. So what? Said Bottis. The Thesmophoria, your young wife off to join the wild women. Bottis drank. Agathon laughed. It was easy for him. He wasn't married yet. He edged forward, needling his friend. I hear they tell each other about all the men they've been with. If Antigone had ever been with a man, I wouldn't have married her. Besides, you're a man too, you know. Agathon spread his arms and smiled. But I want them to talk about me. Well, I know they'll only say good things. Bottis drank. I hear they make love to each other out there. I hear they summon up a satyr and all take turns with him, even the old women, especially them. I hear, oh, you'll like this, Bottis. I hear they make love with pigs. Garbage. It's true. Let's ask Glycera. Glycera! One of the courtesans half turned at the sound of her name. Her peplos was undone, exposing her chest, but the men she'd been entertaining on the couch were entertaining one another now. She had the look of someone waiting to be finished with the workday. "Is it true what they say?" Agathon called. He winked. "About Thesmophoria." "How should I know? It's married women only. Citizens' wives." "Oh, but women talk, don't they?" Glycera laughed. "Well, not to my kind, they don't." Agathon smiled. "But you have your theories." She smiled back. "Oh, whatever dark things you imagine. I'm sure that's just the half of it." None of this comforted Bottas. He flicked his dregs again, hit Pinder in the throat, and thrust out his cup for another refill. "It's completely backward," he complained. "In this day and age, she's my wife, but for 3 days a year she belongs to some cult." "It's not some cult," said Glycera. "Thesmophoria's been around forever. It's not like she's joined the Orphics. Would you shut up?" Glycera paled and turned back to her work. Agathon sighed and looked into his cup. Nothing could ever just be fun with Bottas. "Look, there's no reason to get worked up," he said. "I was just teasing. Thesmophoria's nothing. A bunch of old maids sleeping in tents for 3 days. Now, Bottas leaned forward. He stuck a finger in his friend's face. "You don't know that. Men aren't allowed to know what goes on. So how do you know she's not going to do or say something that embarrasses me? Every married woman goes, Bottas. It's not... I don't care what every woman does. Antigone's my wife. Her father chose me. I'm responsible for her, and that means I'm entitled." "So what are you going to do?" Bored of his friend, Agathon let his gaze drift back to Glycera. "Stop her from going? The magistrates will have you up on charges." Bottas crossed his arms. "I'm just going to make sure, is all. I'm just going to make sure she doesn't shame me." "How?" But Bottas wouldn't say anything further, and when Agathon gave up and went to find Glycera, he spent the rest of the evening drinking in silence, staring blackly at Sappho's portrait on the wall. 2. Nestea, the fast. Laughing together in large groups and speaking with low voices in 2s or 3s, the women wound their way up a chalk track through thyme, acanthus, and hyssop and sage, all fragrant with the warmth of autumn sun. From the white roofs of the polis, the city below, the colors of their gowns, yellow, rose madder, and umber black, and sometimes purple Tyrian, all seemed at one with the colors of the Frigana scrubland, with the dry grass and hardy stalks and pink and purple flowers. The polis was filled with women excluded from this rite, and some of them would stop on days like this to watch the procession climb. Maybe some were resentful, others envious, and others wistful. Maybe they wished they too could climb out of this world forever. Or maybe they wished that all the flowers would simply burn. Shepherds and swineherds lived under broad hats and light tents in those hills, but they gave a wide berth to the Thesmophorian procession. Whatever they thought, they were humble men, and at least they feared the goddess's wrath, Demeter with her ancient laws, and terrible Persephone, the queen of death. But one man, in the clothing of a shepherd, followed the procession at a distance through the hills. And he had no sheep. As day lengthened, the celebrants passed beyond the grazed scrubland that ringed the city walls. The green of the earth rose about them. Acanthus and hyssop gave way to red-limbed arbutus and fragrant laurel. Lavender thickened into the trunks of 1,000-year olives, and tall pines and muscular oaks cast shadows of the underworld far along the yellow grass. The women reached a certain place where deep chasms in the limestone hills reached down into the blackness of the earth. The greatest of these chasms was named Megara, which meant something like the Great Hall. On the edges of this pit, the women let down their burdens and began to build their tents. A few raised fires, and a few began to draw water, and somebody took down the amphorae of wine which had been carried up by the mules, and somebody began to cook a meal of the sacred grains, and they thickened this pottage in Carthaginian style, with eggs and honey and much fresh cheese, and seasoned it with thyme plucked wild from the hills, and with rare, pungent silphium from far Cyrene. And there, in the evening redness of twilight, the women laughed and talked and undid their hair, and ate and drank, and somebody brought forth the owlus and lyre and tambourine, and many danced with the sheer joy of being free. Up in the hills above, Bautis sat on a rock among sharp cedars and watched them through the spines and cones. It was cold up here, and the stone rough against bare buttocks underneath his tunic. He was thirsty after the hike, but hadn't brought enough water and needed to save what he had. He was hungry. The smell of the sacred pottage made his mouth water, but all he had to eat was a pouch full of dried meat. He chewed on the gristle, blaming the women below for making him drag himself out here to keep an eye on his wife. There she was, down among the other younger women, dancing with flowers in her hair. He felt a sudden pang. Antigone, she'd been so lively and bright, so like he saw her now when he first met her in her father's house. But these days, in the women's quarters at home, he was used to finding her gray and silent. Suddenly, a chasm opened in his belly. She had a lover out here. What else could explain it? The sudden lightness, sudden joy, these flowers woven in her hair. Suspicion boiled over into anger, and he stood from the rock and began to pace among the trees, slapping at the cedar boughs when they scratched his face. He imagined some young shepherd climbing down from the hills and slipping into her tent at night. His lithe body, her smile in the half-darkness, the warmth with which she gave herself to him, and all when he, Bautis, her lawful lord and husband, was never met with anything but cold endurance. He bit his lip. The others would all know about it, of course, her betrayal of him. They would all smile to themselves as they turned a deaf ear to the sounds of love-making in their midst. The sacrilege of it. The shame! Yes, he raged to himself. All the women would know. In town, they'd cast knowing glances at him, and they'd tell their husbands in private, so the men would know as well. And he, Bautis, would be a universal laughing-stock. That couldn't be allowed. The anger was a redness pounding at the edges of his brow. A bolt of canvas tightened around his chest. Somebody would have to pay. Die, if that's what it came to. People needed to understand. Bautis wasn't the type of man you trifled with. Then he was distracted from his frenzy by the sound of a blowing horn. He looked up from his fists to find the redness of day had burned to blue. Twilight had come. He pushed his way through sharp cedars to find that torches had been lit below, and that a crowd had gathered at the great pit's edge. With twilight, a cool haze was forming. Over the black pit's mouth, it rose slowly like the fog of breath. One of the women was speaking, her deep voice cutting the twilight calm, though from up here he couldn't make out any words. She carried a torch in one hand, and with the other gestured out over the darkness, over the Megara, great hall of the goddess below. The women all answered her in unison. With surprise, Bautis recognized the speaker. She was Rhea. She was the mother of his wife. At home in the city, she was quiet and obeyed an aged husband. Here, the firelight reflected in her eyes. Over the hills, a late moon was rising. Autumn turned it red as a poppy in the goddess's crown. As red light ran down the hilltops, Rhea called out and moved her arm toward the assembly of women. Bautis saw Antigone among them, her eyes all shining in the torchlight. Whatever was happening here, he didn't like it. He didn't want his young wife involved. He shifted forward for a better view. The women parted, and a procession slid forward among them from under the arms of a silver laurel grove. For a moment, Bautis thought the women of this procession were mothers, that they carried squalling children in their arms. But the children were too big, he realized, their cries too shrill, and with strange horror he slowly came to understand that they weren't children at all. They were all young pigs, struggling in the women's arms, bound, crazed and filthy, soiled with fear. Now, women came forward from the crowd to accept these struggling hogs into their arms. Antigone was one of them, and took a squealing shout to her breast, the same movements she used to hold their son at home. What profanity was he witnessing? And did she hold some office here among the women? For they placed a crown of grain about her brow, and parted as she led the women to the edge. Then, with a slow dread, Bautis came to understand something. He had no idea where the idea came from. It just thickened in his mind until it was completely solid, completely certain. He knew, without needing any evidence, that every single one of those pigs was male. Antigone raised that shout above her head, and as it screamed, Bautis realized his heart was pounding, that his cold palms were soaked in sweat, not because he cared about the fate of a pig, but because the expression on his young wife's face was so transformed. She was feral. He'd never seen such hate distort those smooth, compliant features. He'd never seen those white teeth bared. It was unnatural. Something here corrupted her. These vile old women, left to strange devices in the hills, left to warp beneath the dark influence of their alien god. He had to get her out of here. And the moment he thought this, Antigone hurled the pig. For one long heartbeat it hung above the yawning black, reddened by firelight and moonlight. And then it fell into the endless darkness of the pit, screaming as it tumbled, for a long, long time. The other women came up en masse and flung their pigs into the pit as well, and the night filled with screaming, and more pigs fell, and more, and the red moon bathed their pale bodies as they hurtled down toward the goddess's halls, legs flailing as they tried to run upon the empty air. Bautis raised one hand to his lips. He thought he might be sick. His heavy gold ring caught the redness of the moonlight. 1. Anodes, the ascent. He waited till the revelry below was silent. He waited a long time. The moon crested and whitened. He was exhausted, but the heat of his rage, his disgust and confusion, kept him warm, kept him awake. He paced beneath the cedar trees, pricking his palm with a needle to stay sharp. The moon sank. His mind was full of dark thoughts. Maybe he did drift off at some point, because those thoughts veered into wild reverie. He saw Antigone in that tent on the edge of camp, writhing under the body of her young suitor. Then, all of a sudden, she was making love to a great sow. Then he shook himself awake. The images had excited him. He didn't know what to do with that excitement, or with his own confusion around it. He felt the need to hit something, hurt something. By now, the night was deep and dark. The moon had hid herself behind hills and cedars on the valley's other side, and so he began his careful descent toward the camp. The dry undergrowth made noise beneath his sandals, but he found he didn't care so much. If someone discovered him, he'd break their neck, and that thought filled him with a bitter satisfaction. Down through rocks and low, hard shrubs, past low embers at the edge of camp. And then the tent he'd stared at for hours from above. Antigone's. He paused outside. When he parted the flaps, would he find her with a lover wrapped within, with that young shepherd from his fears? He remembered the smile she'd worn while dancing. What did she have to feel so happy about, if not some other man? The anger came up suddenly again. He ripped open the flaps of the tent and ducked inside. All within was quiet, bathed in dim gray light. Antigone. She lay silent, bundled in a blanket, and alone. A breath went out of him slowly. He almost could have laughed at himself. Of course there had been no shepherd boy. She was his, wasn't she? It was just the joy of a holiday that had illuminated her face before. Perhaps she'd even been thinking of him, her love rekindled by a brief absence, as now he found that his had been. He reached down gently to pull aside the blanket from her face. His anger gone. He closed his eyes and bent close to place a kiss upon her sleeping lips. He found them cold. A strange, sick smell was waiting underneath the blanket. When his eyes snapped open, he found not the loving gaze of his warm young bride, but the hollow stare of a cold, dead pig, grinning from the wide and jagged maw of its knife-slit throat. A low noise of horror welled up from his chest. He scrubbed his lips with the back of his hand, trying to clear away the taste of death. He took a half-step back, but sudden movement came from every side outside the tent, and the walls of cloth crushed in around him, and he shouted out in panic as the weight of many bodies bore him to the ground and began to crush the living air from his lungs. They beat the man inside the tent with rocks and canes. They kicked him and broke wine jugs on his head. He howled and struggled, but was smothered in cloth and helpless. They battered him until the blood came darkly through, and struggle ceased. Then they unwrapped him. He was punch-drunk, but live. "Antigone," he whimpered as they tied him to the carcass of a pig and drove him round the camp on all fours in the dust. Every married woman of the polis gathered round to watch him, and their eyes glittered in the light of low fires. "Agathon, Agathon, come and help me, brother." But no man came to save him in this sacred place. The moon came round again, sliding, smiling red from out behind the hills, that poppy color once again. "Please." The words came vaguely from his bloody lips, and he wasn't even sure who said them. I didn't mean. But he wasn't sure they understood him. Wasn't sure his words were even coming out as words. Why did they look at him as if he wasn't human? Why did he feel his words were just the squealings of another pig? Then, cool arms came down and helped him to his feet. He stared up wildly, and in firelight, with the great dark of the goddess standing tall behind her, beheld his own young bride, all crowned with golden grain. "Antigone," he moaned. "Oh, Antigone, let's get out of here." And she supported him on her cool shoulder, like she was supposed to. And she was as quiet, kind, and docile as she was meant to be. "Let's go home," he told her. But she smiled and said nothing. "Antigone." Why would she ignore him? "Answer me!" Then he realized, too late, where he was standing. She was giving him her answer. Her hand was cool and gentle on his chest. But when he looked up at her face, he understood a great many things for the first time in his life. Then she pushed him over the Megara's edge, and he fell for a long, long time. When Bautis landed in the dark, the cavern floor was soft with dead and dying pigs, some scraping, wheezing, others groaning in the dark. That softness broke his fall enough to make his dying very slow. He scraped, he wheezed, he dragged his broken body through the chambers of the deep, and he died afraid. Not because of darkness, or of pigs, or of the dawning reality of death itself, but because he heard the goddess moving slow behind him in the dark. 0. Tritolamus, the life from death. In autumn, before the Thesmophoria, a few respected women of the city purified themselves and went into the hills. There they found Megara, the empty hall, and lowered themselves below with ropes. For some days they gathered up the remnants of last year's Thesmophoria and piled them in baskets and hauled them to the overworld. Then they loaded reeking panniers onto mules and came back down toward the city. Farmers and landlords awaited them. At each stretch of farm or fertile ground, they stopped and spent an hour spreading the goddess's fertilizer on the soil. Agathon's farms were near the last, and for the sake of his friendship with their vanished Bautis, Antigone and Rhea fertilized these properties themselves. It was a strange thing, Agathon thought, watching them. Bautis gone, but not dead legally. And so Antigone could not remarry. She was, for a brief time, free. He wondered how long the magistrates would let the situation last. By the hour of sunset they'd finished, and they met his eye and smiled remorseless as he thanked them and watched them go together back toward the city. Then he sent his enslaved workers home and walked the fields by himself. The sun bled down, the skies turned poppy red, and he found the thing that he was looking for. A reddish gleam down in the soil. He bent and dug his fingers through the pungent earth, the goddess's own black gift, and found the object that he thought he'd find. A heavy gold ring. He'd never known, he thought, a pig who wore a ring. He sighed. After a moment, he loosened his fingers and left the ring where it lay. Let one of the slaves find it. Let them buy their freedom. Let Antigone enjoy another year of peace. Then he wiped his hands and stood, and walked back along the new scratched furrows in the soil. And all the while, behind him, night set in. The Wrong Station is made possible with the generous support of our listeners on Patreon. Join us today at patreon.com/thewrongstation for bonus episodes, behind-the-scenes content, ad-free listening, and additional goodies celebrating our decade of dread. This week's episode, Thesmophoria, was written by Alexander Saxton and performed by Anthony Botelho. Thank you to Dana, Watafino, Riamara, Jason Heflin, Ike Moritz, Albomac, Zamandius, M. Bombardier McDonough, Jen Gillis, Nude Noodles, Victor Martinez, Gremlin Coded, Melissa Asaturi, PETA, and Cindy Bottomley for helping us keep the lights, well, off. The Wrong Station is co-produced by Alexander Saxton, Anthony Botelho, and Jacob Duarte Spiel, with music composed and performed by Alon Citrin, and arranged for the viola and performed by Viola Schmidt. You can follow us on social media at The Wrong Station or email us at thewrongstation@gmail.com. And until next time, thank you for listening.